Bonjour, Pier-Philippe Chevigny. Thank you for coming to PRINDIE, even if virtually on Zoom.
Bonjour, thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. I personally loved your film Rebel. Could you tell us a bit about it? That is how it came into existence, and how long have you worked on it?
Yeah, so it's actually inspired by the rise of right-wing extremism in Quebec. Historically, Quebec has always been a pretty left-wing place. For the past 60 years or so, we've only elected left-wing or center governments. But for the past 5 years, there's been like an increase. We feel like the whole nation is steering towards the right. We've just elected our first actual right-wing government in ages. And there's been like an explosion of these sort of right-wing militia groups that kind of mirror what's happening in the States with the alt-right movement. So militia-like groups that are called La Meute, Storm Alliance, Soldiers of Odin, that have a very anti-immigration agenda and that have done protests at the border in Quebec City also. And so that whole phenomenon was really disturbing to me, and I've started doing a lot of research back in 2017. And after the very first big demonstration that they did in Quebec City, on the next day, one of the newspapers had for its front page the picture of a 6 or 7-year-old boy holding a flag with their logo on it. And I thought to myself, that kid has no idea what this is all about. He doesn't understand the politics. He's just following his parents, following his family. And I thought that might be like a nice way to enter into that world. So I started writing the script to Rebel based on that, basically based on that image.
That boy is beautiful, but also the most troubling part about the movies is how young he is and how his family indoctrinates him at such an early age, from the rituals, weapons, and the heavy metal song that he and his father danced to. But also I think, and importantly, it points toward a future, both good and bad future. And I want to ask you, I've watched this film a few times, and it always yields something, or at least presents questions. Why is it in the future, right? It is set in 21 or 22 rather, in 1922.
So specifically, the film is just trying to imagine how things could end up in the near future. Right now, there are to my knowledge and to the mainstream media's knowledge, there are no groups hunting illegal immigrants at the border. That's fiction. But these groups exist. They've done demonstrations. You might have heard of the Quebec City mosque shooting a few years ago.
Yes, of course. Yeah.
That guy was involved in those groups as well. So it's just trying to imagine if we tolerate these groups to exist, and they're very active on social media. There's La Meute, the biggest one of them. They've got like 25,000 followers on Facebook. So it's not that big of a deal, but it's you have to pay attention to it. And so the idea was just to imagine something like that, a story like, a militia group like this getting together and hunting migrants at the border. That's not happening right now, but in a few years, if we tolerate these groups, it could happen. And also, since 2017, there's been a lot of irregular migrants crossing the border, fleeing the US to enter Canada because they're fleeing. They were scared pretty much of the Trump administration's policy towards refugees. So a lot of them were afraid, and they started entering the country to ask for refugee status here. And that has caused quite a big stir among the right-wing groups, because it's against their anti-immigration agenda. So what's happening in the film is not happening right now, but all the ingredients are there to make it happen very soon.
Of course, your futures are present. It has been happening here for a long time. Militias patrolling southern borders, in particular, hunting immigrants. So it is very interesting to see it in America at this particular time.
Yeah, but that's something. America has this reputation, as a more conservative country. Rather, Canada, the image is like we're very progressive and open-minded, and it's something that like 5 years ago you could not even imagine could happen. Like having right-wing militia groups patrolling the cities, that didn't happen. So that's what's unique about it, is that you wouldn't expect it to happen here, but it does. Stuff like this happens here also. You know?
So when you said research, what do you mean by research? It was just reading websites, or did you actually interview militia members?
Actually, I tried, but I didn't want to pretend like I was going to be their friend and, you know, enter the movement. But I did reach out to a lot of them, and they all turned me down. So my research was mostly based on social media. I became their Facebook friends, and I followed all of their posts for like 3 years. And I've recorded those messages, and part of that has inspired the film. And I've also done a short documentary that's called Bait, using only footage that they have posted on their Facebook pages. So yeah, the bulk of my research was mostly social media.
And so how did you do casting? The actors are great, because you do believe they're militia members, complete with a tattoo on the neck. I mean, those details are, as I tell my students often, are, you know, the bread and butter of all art. So how did you do the casting?
So the father, Emil Schneider, is a good friend of mine. He's worked on my previous short films, and I really wanted to write a script that would put him forward, because he's a very talented actor. And so I began writing the script with him in mind. So that was set in stone pretty much by the time I started writing the script. But for the boy, finding the boy was a real challenge, you know, because it's very hard finding really, really young kids, because he's like, when we shot, he just turned 7. So he's really, really young. He's not very mature, doesn't really understand, doesn't have a lot of experience, so that it's really hard to work with children in general. And we auditioned, I think we must have seen like 40 boys. And when you audition kids, you can tell right away, you know, does he really want to be there, or is it his parents pushing him to be there? You can tell if they're not really interested. But he walked into the room and he was super enthusiastic. He said hi to everyone. He was really genuinely enjoying himself. And that's what made a difference. And of course, he had the look, he had the talent, but to know that he really wanted to do it and that we could work with him was really what pushed in his favor. Because most of it, if you've paid really close attention, most of the scenes are shot in a single long take. And those need to be choreographed. They're very complex, and it's hard to do that with a child, because it takes a lot of takes to get it right. You know, when there's a lot of moving around, where there's also a cat on cue, a kid, you know, usually, you know, if you ask directors, they'll tell you a kid will get, you know, tired of shooting after 3 takes. So you have to make sure that everybody else is ready to get it in 3 takes. And that was not really possible in this situation, because the long takes were so complex. So I found the kid that really wanted to do it and understood that it might take like a long time to get it right. And so that it was great. He's really, really, really good.
There was, I forgot what I wanted to ask you, but it was interesting. I wanted to ask you this in relation to the kid. It's not just directing the kids and, you know, on the set, but you would have to have explained to him who those people are, the militia. In other words, the whole notion of racism and white supremacy and borders and patriotism and nationalism and so on. I would think that's extremely complicated for anyone, for a parent, let alone for a director. How did you go about that?
Well, his mother was really instrumental in making sure that he understood as much as he possibly could. But of course, I wouldn't go as far as saying as he understood all the politics behind it. But of course, it's deep down, it's a story about empathy. You know, it's a story about a kid that feels empathy for another child. And at that level, you know, for sure he could relate. You know, he understood that part, and that's the reason why his acting is so good, because he understood that part. As far as politics go, probably I'm not even sure if he really understands it fully now. You know, we shot like 2 years, now 3 years ago almost. So yeah, of course, it's very complex issues for children, but he understood like the basis of it.
He's great. There are a lot of short films in particular with children in the main roles, and which I like, but it also is somewhat strange because it's so hard to shoot with children. What is the benefit of organizing a film or a story around a child, do you think?
That's a good question. And you know, when we were shooting, sometimes I was kind of regretting it because it was so hard for so many reasons. But to be honest, there's been like, especially short films these past years, there's been a string of short films with children, especially at the Oscars, like there was Fauve and Detainment and all those great films. But when I started writing on the script, they weren't out yet. I hadn't seen any of them. So that's part of the thing, that you don't know what's going to be trendy 2 years from now. So, but really, to me, it was just a powerful narrative device, and I related to the child's point of view because in many ways that kid is me. You know, watching other kids being bullied at school when I was a kid, you know, that empathy is basically mine. So that's really what drove me to write the part and give it to a child. And also there's, of course, this poetry, to have the child is very naive view, the fact that he doesn't really understand what's going on. That's a good narrative device also, because it puts the viewer in his shoes, and you have to kind of understand what's going on by watching and following him. You don't understand everything when you start watching the film. You don't really know where this is going, what this is going to be about, because the kid doesn't understand and doesn't know where this is going. And the viewer understand what's happening once he realizes what's going on. So I think, you know, in terms of script writing, that was a powerful tool.
I think it matches the way you shot, obviously, because you're a good filmmaker, matches the way you shot the film, sort of staying close to the kid, handheld camera, following him wherever he goes, so that we always are attached to his point of view. I want to ask you, because my screenwriting students will be watching you, I hope, about your process of writing the script. I only write scripts. I'm not a filmmaker, and so no matter how much I try to suppress the words in the script, it's always the words for me, because I cannot really visualize what it is going to look like. But for you, a filmmaker of your kind, someone who writes and directs and edits, to what extent is your film finished in the script? And if it's not, what else do you have to do once you start shooting? I mean, intellectually, imaginatively.
Usually, yeah, there's a lot of technical descriptions in my scripts, which is something like a screenwriting teacher would probably tell his students not to do. But to me, like the way it's shot is so important to the way people are going to see it, that I always write with very specific technical descriptions, like the cameras following overhead, et cetera, et cetera. And so most of the times it's pretty much the way it is. Like Rebel, there's not a lot that has changed in terms of pacing or structure. The only thing that has changed is when I was writing it, I was expecting to be able to shoot the whole scene where the little girl gets tied down. I wanted to shoot it in a single long take, and never really having every single scene be a long take. But we found that when doing it, it was so hard for so many reasons to have both kids on cue, that it was just best to like make it in a traditional shot, reverse shot. So that's one of the things that has changed from the original script. And I think in many ways, it's for the better, because this scene is much more easier to follow the kid's reaction, because you can see what he's seeing and you cut back to his face. Whereas a long take, you'd have like the camera pan from one side to the other. It wouldn't be as immediate or effective. But other than that, the script is pretty much the same structure, same pacing. You know, the plot points happen pretty much at the same places. So not a lot has changed, because the editing is kind of already done in the writing. The way I'm going to shoot it is already written as is in the script.
So when you start writing the first draft already includes visual cues. You're already imagining what it's going to look like, as opposed to someone else might do it that way, laying down the character, the story, or the situation. So you're already editing in your script.
Yeah, absolutely. I have very strong visual images, and those are like, I try to listen to what I see and I try to describe what I'm seeing rather than only having it plot based, which is, I try to work with like Aristotle, three act structure, all that, as much as I can, but I try to leave some space for what I'm seeing so that it stays visually interesting.
Yeah, 3x structure. It's a nice framework to start working on a script, but it always slips out of control to my mind. um, it's also interesting to me, and this is something that I like to convey to my students, but also I know from my vicarious film experience, is that so much of filmmaking is contingencies. That is, you make decisions because something that you have wanted to do, that you want to do, cannot be done, and then you have to make another decision, right? And often that decision might be better, comparatively speaking. I like in that scene when the boy is looking at the girl and her family, cutting away to the boy's face. You have a sense that he's thinking there, that it's a moment of understanding, that this is the beginning of his understanding what is going on, and the moment when the empathy is happening.
Yeah.
In writing, there are no contingencies. I'm in pure writing. I write fiction mainly. You just do it until it's done. There's no need to suddenly change the plans, right?
Of
So
course.
can you talk about that unpredictability in filmmaking? That's interesting to me.
Yeah, of course. Whenever I'm writing, I don't think about what the worst case scenario is going to be. I try to think about what's the best idea, what's what's plan A first and foremost. And then when you get on set, sometimes you don't have a lot of money, you don't have a lot of time to shoot, you have to do it really fast. So, and it works to have good collaborators as well that can also bounce ideas, and it's a teamwork basically, and you find solutions to your problems together. But thankfully, with all the shorts I've made, there's never been a case where something I wanted to do was not possible, and the end result ended up being less good than what I envisioned. Like, I was lucky enough that every time there was like contingencies like that, we were able to make it work to our advantage, basically. Yeah, but that's part of the job.
Right. But you have your own production company, so your crew usually work with the same people, right?
I don't have my own production company, but my producer is my girlfriend. So yeah, it's a big family.
So your production company has you.
Yeah.
That's not bad either. Good. On your website, I could see that Rebel has been on many festivals, right? It's done pretty well. A lot of people have seen it, and PRINDIE will see it too. What has been the response? What do people say in Canada and elsewhere in the world?
Yeah. It's kind of hard because even though it's the film that has done the most festival, because it happened straight in the middle of COVID. Like, there's a huge chunk that I couldn't be there for obvious reason. Right. So I didn't get as many one-on-one contact with the audience as I would have liked. But I can tell, like, I was there at the very beginning of the run in Canada, at TIFF in Toronto, and especially in English Canada. They're very worried about the rise of right-wing extremism in Quebec. They don't really understand Quebec. So the biggest response was from English Canada, I think, because people are really interested. They're very curious because they don't understand Quebec. And then in Quebec, I've had also the opposite reaction. Lots of nationalists in Quebec that were really frustrated with me depicting nationalism that way, So it's a little bit of both. And internationally, I think people really mostly relate on the human level, the empathy, the kid's story. And but like I said, I think I've only been to 2 screenings outside of Canada, both in Belgium. So I don't really know the pulse, and it's pushing on 40 festivals now. So
I wish we could host you here.
I wish I could be there.
By the way, has the kid seen the movie?
Yes, of course. He was there at the premiere at TIFF in Toronto. And yeah, he's super proud. He tried to be there. Like, there was the world premiere was in Toronto. Then we had a Montreal premiere. He was there also. He tried to show up every time he could, but then of course COVID happened. So
yes, wow, it's great. Let me ask you about your future plans.
Yeah.
A lot of times, short films, in my experience, they are shot and made as though they are a chapter for some future project. And I talked to filmmakers who, developing a script, a bigger project, but they shot a chunk of it in the hope of expanding it. So about your future projects, are you going to expand Rebel on the one hand? And if not, what is the next thing you want to do?
I don't want to judge people who do that, but I never write short films I try to write short films that work on their own as their own separate thing. It's never about, this is the opening scene to my feature. I think if you do that, either if your idea is really good to make a short film, probably you're gonna not be able to stretch it all the way to a feature. So I try to really make short films that are self-contained and that are their own thing. But of course, the end game for me is making features, And I think the model you're describing is very common in the States. People will get a little bit of money to do a short, and then they can, make their feature. But here in Quebec, with the film funds, short films are really supported and treated as an art in itself, and that's what the industry kind of fosters. And so all of my short films so far have been based on social issues because I have a background as a progressive activist. And my features that I'm working on right now, I'm writing 2 features at the same time, and they're kind of cut from the same cloth. They're not about right-wing extremism, but they're certainly in the same sort of topics for sure.
Let me ask you this as a screenwriter too. All of the scripts I've worked on, have always been collaborations because I have my literature to be by myself. Mm-hmm. Have you worked on a script with someone, and would you ever, if you have not? How does it work? Do you engage with other people while developing a story?
I've worked with other people before. There's a few of my shorts that actually one of my short, my very first short that has made festivals, it was co-written, and I'm really happy with the way that turned out. Usually I have a hard time working with somebody else because, like I said, I have very clear visual ideas, and if I'm not writing with the writer, I'm gonna have to rewrite it eventually to fit my vision into that. So it makes it kind of hard to collaborate. But I've started collaborating with people on new projects now, and I try to be as open-minded as possible to other people's ideas, because if you shot the other guys or the other girl's idea before you had the chance to hear it, then you're probably missing out on something. So it's definitely something I want to do more, because writing a script is very hard, and sometimes when you get stuck, it's very hard to get unstuck. But when you're with somebody else, you can bounce ideas, and then usually it's fairly easy to find the way out when you're stuck. And also, since I'm writing on social issues and about minority groups, I feel in a way that, the whole discussion about exclusion and appropriation is something that I'm really aware and sensitive to. And if I want to go forward and keep making films about minorities, it's really important that I work with collaborators from those communities. So like one of the 2 features I'm working on is going to be co-written for sure, for that reason.
Good luck. I look forward to those features. I want to thank you now for talking to us. Again, I wish we could host you in person. We could go and have a drink after this, but maybe next time, sometime in the future. Yeah. Thank you very much, Pier-Philippe Chevigny, and I hope to meet you in person sometime.
Wish to meet you also.
Our pleasure. Good luck to you.
Thank you very much.